On the night of January 31st, 2026, an 84-year-old woman named Nancy Guthrie had dinner with her daughter in Tucson, Arizona, and her son-in-law drove her home afterward, watching her walk through her garage door. He waited at the curb until it rolled shut behind her because he wanted to be sure she was safely inside. It was a mild Saturday evening, ordinary in every way, and he drove home thinking nothing of it. By the next morning, Nancy was gone, and the blood on her front step was the first sign that she had not left on her own. She was taken in her pajamas, without shoes, without the heart medication she needed every single day to stay alive, and whoever took her left everything else behind, including her phone, her purse, and her Apple Watch, as though the only thing they came for was her. As of the time this video was made, she has not been found, no one has been charged, and her family is still waiting for answers, more than 2 months later. Nancy Ellen Long was born on January 27, 1942, in Fort Wright, Kentucky, and by the early 1970s, she had moved to the Tucson area with her family and put down roots there that would hold for more than 50 years. She married a man named Charles Guthrie, and together they had 3 children, Savannah, Annie, and Cameron. Charles died of a heart attack in 1988, which left Nancy to raise the family on her own, and she did, and Tucson remained home through all of it. By the time she reached her 80s, Nancy was living alone in a neighborhood called the Catalina Foothills, a quiet residential area tucked into the hills just north of central Tucson, where the houses sit far apart from one another. She had some trouble with mobility, as many people her age do, and she depended on daily heart medication and a pacemaker to keep her cardiac rhythm stable. That pacemaker connected to her phone through an app, which meant her health data could be monitored remotely, and she also had a doorbell camera installed at the front of her home. For a woman in her 80s living alone, these were the practical, sensible arrangements that her family had helped put in place, the kind of safety net that everyone hopes never has to do its real job. Her daughter Savannah is one of the most recognizable names in American television, having co-anchored NBC's Today Show for well over a decade. She was, at the time all of this happened, preparing to co-host the coverage of the 2026 Winter Olympics opening ceremonies, which was a big assignment, and one she stepped away from immediately when her mother disappeared. Everything else could wait. On the evening of January 31st, 2026, a Saturday, Nancy left her home at 5:32 in the afternoon and got into an Uber headed to her daughter Annie's house nearby. It was a family dinner night, nothing ceremonial about it, just a meal and some time together, and maybe a game, the kind of evening families have without making much of it. Annie's husband, Tommaso Cioni, was there, and the evening wound down the way those evenings do, and when it was time for Nancy to go home, Tommaso drove her. He pulled up to her house in the Catalina Foothills, watched her go in through the garage, and waited at the curb until the garage door had fully closed behind her. It was somewhere between 9:30 and 10 at night, and he had no reason to feel anything other than satisfied that she was safely inside. So he left. That was the last confirmed sighting of Nancy Guthrie. Hello, welcome back, or welcome for the first time if you're new here. This channel covers real disappearances, unsolved cases, and true crime stories that sticks in your mind long after you stop watching, and if that sounds like your kind of thing, it would genuinely mean a lot if you subscribed and left a like before you go, because it really does help keep this channel going. Now, let's get into this one, because it is still unfolding and there is a lot to cover. What happened between that moment and the following morning is the part of this story that investigators have been trying to piece together ever since, and while they have managed to outline the rough shape of it, the center of it remains unclear. At 1:47 in the morning, Nancy's doorbell camera disconnected from its network and went offline. It stopped recording, stopped transmitting, and stopped doing everything a security camera is supposed to do. At 2:12 in the morning, the camera's internal motion sensor registered movement outside the front door, but because Nancy did not have an active cloud subscription, nothing visual was saved by the device itself. It detected something, it just didn't capture it. 16 minutes after that, at 2:28 in the morning, Nancy's pacemaker stopped syncing with her Apple devices, and that was the last signal her phone received from her heart. 3 events, 41 minutes, the middle of the night, and then nothing. Nancy was a devout Christian, and she attended church faithfully, and she was expected at a friend's house on the morning of February 1st to watch an online church service together. When she did not show up and did not call, the people expecting her noticed immediately, and word got back to her family, and her family called the Pima County Sheriff's Department. Officers arrived at her home in the Catalina Foothills and found what her family had already found: her belongings untouched, the back doors propped open, and blood near the front entrance of the house. It was a small amount, but it was visible, and forensic testing later confirmed it was Nancy's. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos held a press conference the following morning and told reporters what investigators had concluded: Nancy had not left on her own. She had not wandered off or had a medical episode that took her somewhere else. She had been abducted. Search and rescue teams were deployed across the surrounding area, and homicide detectives were assigned to her home, which was a detail that mattered more than it might have seemed at the time, because homicide detectives are not typically the first responders to a kidnapping unless there is a genuine concern about whether the person is still alive. Investigators also began looking into a damaged utility box near Nancy's home as a possible explanation for why her internet had gone down when it did. If that box had been tampered with deliberately, then the disruption to her doorbell camera was not a coincidence, and someone had cut off her connection to the outside world before they ever set foot on her property. The first ransom note arrived at Cold, a Tucson television news station, on the evening of February 2nd. Its full contents were not released to the public, but law enforcement confirmed that it contained specific details about Nancy's home and about what she had been wearing the night she disappeared. The kind of precise, intimate information that is hard to explain away as guesswork. It demanded $4 million in Bitcoin to be paid by February 5th, with the warning that if the deadline passed, the amount would increase to $6 million, with a new deadline of February 9th. In the days that followed, TMZ and another Tucson station, KGUN 9, both received what appeared to be identical copies of the same letter, with the same language and the same demands, and the FBI confirmed it was studying them, though it could not immediately verify whether they were genuine. What struck former FBI agents commenting publicly on the case was that the notes were being sent to news outlets rather than directly to the Guthrie family, which is unusual in a ransom situation, because the people who take someone for money normally want to talk to the people who can actually pay, not to a television station's news director. The absence of direct contact, combined with the absence of any proof of life, made the whole thing genuinely difficult to read. On February 4th, Savannah, Annie, and Cameron released a video together, speaking directly to whoever they believed had their mother. They said they were ready to talk, but they needed to know she was alive before they could take any next step, because the world, as Savannah put it, is one where voices and images can be fabricated, and they were not going to act on something they couldn't verify. They asked whoever had Nancy to reach out to them, and they said they were ready to listen. On February 5th, the FBI arrested a 42-year-old California man named Derek Colella on federal charges alleging that he had impersonated the real kidnappers and sent a fraudulent ransom demand directly to Annie and Tommaso. Authorities made clear that his scheme was entirely separate from the other ransom notes that had been circulating through the news outlets, and that his arrest did not in any way resolve the broader question of who had actually taken Nancy. He was an opportunist who had watched a national story unfold and tried to insert himself into it for money, which happens more often than most people realize in high-profile cases. On February 7th, the family released another video, and this one was different in tone from the first. Savannah said the family had received a message and that they understood it, and she asked for Nancy to be returned to them, saying that it was the only way there would be peace and that it was very valuable to them and that they would pay. That video was understood by sources familiar with the investigation to be a direct response to the ransom demand the FBI and the Pima County Sheriff were treating as credible, though no official confirmation was ever made public about whether any payment was arranged or attempted. President Donald Trump posted publicly that he had spoken with Savannah personally and had directed all federal law enforcement to make themselves fully available to the family and to local authorities. And the White House shared information about Nancy's disappearance on its social media accounts, urging the public to come forward with anything they knew. On February 10th, 10 days after Nancy's disappearance was reported, the FBI released footage and photographs from her doorbell camera. And the way they got that footage is worth understanding, because it says something about how thoroughly the evidence had been disrupted. The camera had gone offline during the night, and its local recording had been cut, but FBI forensic specialists were able to recover fragments of the data from deep within Google's back-end server infrastructure, where pieces of it had been stored without anyone realizing. They built a controlled blackout environment to study what the camera could have seen at night, using replica clothing and a replica backpack to reconstruct what the footage was showing, and what they eventually confirmed was significant. A masked man in gloves had been at Nancy's front porch in the early morning hours of February 1st. He was wearing a black 25-liter backpack from the Ozark Trail brand, which is a private label line sold exclusively at Walmart. and he had a handgun sitting in a holster on his belt. The FBI officially named him a suspect in Nancy's kidnapping and described him as approximately 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 inches tall, with an average build. And they noted that his holster had specific characteristics that investigators hoped might help identify where it was purchased, so they began visiting gun shops and Walmart locations across the Tucson area looking for matches. What analysts who studied the footage noted most, though, was the way this man moved when he approached the house. He did not wander or slow down to get his bearings the way someone would on unfamiliar ground. He went directly to a specific point on the front porch, with a kind of quiet certainty, and he disabled the camera without hesitation. Former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe described the approach as not particularly furtive or concerned, which, in the context of someone committing an abduction in the middle of the night, stood out. That confidence made more sense when sources familiar with the investigation told multiple news outlets that not all of the doorbell images released by the FBI had been captured on the same day. One photograph showed the suspect without his backpack, which was different from the others, and that difference pointed to the possibility that he had visited Nancy's front door on more than one occasion before the night she was taken. Investigators focused on 3 specific dates: January 11th, January 31st, and February 1st. And the picture those dates suggested was one of deliberate preparation. Someone who had watched her home, studied its layout and its rhythms, and returned when they were ready. This had been planned well in advance. The investigation that followed was large, and, by some accounts, complicated by problems within the department leading it. Sources in the law enforcement community told news outlets that the team initially assigned to the case by the Pima County Sheriff's Department lacked experience in homicide-level investigations and made early mistakes that affected the search. A former Pima County sheriff went public with accusations that the crime scene had been mishandled by current department leadership, and the deputies' union, representing more than 300 officers, held a vote in which 241 members called for Sheriff Nanos to resign, with none voting for confidence. A separate and entirely unrelated scandal added to the pressure on the department when a Pima County deputy was arrested and fired on kidnapping charges in a different case entirely, which cast a difficult shadow over an agency already under a national microscope. None of it stopped the investigation from moving forward, though. On February 13th, a multi-agency SWAT operation targeted a residential property roughly 2 miles from Nancy's home, and a gray Range Rover was seized from the parking lot of a nearby restaurant and towed away. At least 3 people were detained and questioned that night, but all of them were released without charges and no arrests were announced. A delivery driver named Carlos Palazuelos, who had been stopped during a traffic stop connected to the operation, gave interviews after his release saying he had been questioned because a tip identified him as resembling the masked suspect in the doorbell footage, and he maintained he had no connection to the case whatsoever. Gloves were found roughly 2 miles from Nancy's home, visually similar to the ones worn by the suspect in the footage, and the FBI tested the DNA on them. But the profile came back as belonging to a local restaurant worker who was cleared immediately. The department noted that other DNA evidence from the scene was still being analyzed. The FBI had also sent alerts to residents within a 2-mile radius of Nancy's home through the Neighbors by Ring app, asking them to review their own security footage going back to January 1st and to report anything that seemed out of place in the weeks before the abduction. By the end of the first 2 weeks, the FBI's Phoenix field office had received more than 13,000 tips, and every one of them needed to be reviewed, and none of them had broken the case open publicly. Pima County Sheriff Nanos released a statement in mid-February making one thing clear that had been circulating as speculation online. Every member of the Guthrie family, including siblings and their spouses, had been fully cleared as suspects. He said the family had been cooperative throughout, and that they were victims in this case, and that to suggest otherwise was not only wrong but cruel. In late February, the Guthrie family announced a $1 million reward for any information that could help with Nancy's recovery, and the word recovery, rather than return, was deliberate and noticeable. When Savannah made the announcement in a video posted to Instagram, she said the family still believed in a miracle, but she also acknowledged that their mother might already be gone. And the difficulty of saying that out loud while still asking people to keep looking was present in every word she chose. For her first full interview since the disappearance, Savannah sat down with her longtime colleague Hoda Kotb for a 3-part Dateline special that aired in late March 2026. And in it, she described the night she found out. She had been at co-host Carson Daly's home with her children, having what she called a beautiful evening, when her phone rang and everything changed. The 12 hours that followed were the longest of her life, as she traveled across the country to be with her family in Tucson. She described what investigators had told her about how her mother was found to have been taken in her pajamas, without shoes, without the heart medication she needed every single day, with all her valuables left inside the house as though whoever came for her had no interest in anything except her. She talked about her brother Cameron, who had spent his career in the military and had worked in intelligence, and how he had understood almost immediately when she called him what had happened. He told her he believed their mother had been taken for ransom, and when Savannah asked him directly whether he thought it had happened because of her name and her visibility on national television, he told her, as carefully as he could, that yes, that was probably part of it. Savannah said she already knew that, but that it was too much to bear, the thought that she had somehow brought this to her mother's doorstep. The combined reward in the case, between what the family offered and what law enforcement contributed separately, had exceeded $1.2 million by the end of February, and that number alone says something about how desperate the situation had become and how little movement there had been publicly in the weeks since Nancy disappeared. As of the time this video was made, Nancy Guthrie had been missing for more than 2 months. Her whereabouts and her condition are still unknown. No suspect has been publicly named or charged in connection with her abduction. The Pima County Sheriff's Department said in late February that the investigation was being refocused onto detectives specifically assigned to the case, and that it would continue until Nancy was located or all leads exhausted. A masked man with a backpack from Walmart stood on an 81-year-old woman's front porch in the dark of an early February morning, and he moved like he had been there before, because he almost certainly had been, and he cut her camera feed before it could capture enough of him to give investigators what they needed. And then he took her in her pajamas without her shoes and without her medication, and he left everything else behind. Somewhere between 2:28 in the morning, when her pacemaker went silent, and the moment her family walked through her back door and found it propped open, Nancy was taken out of her own life, and it has been quiet ever since. If you know anything about what happened that night, or if you saw something in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood in January or early February that felt out of place, please reach out to law enforcement. The FBI tip line is 1-800-CALL-FBI. The Pima County Sheriff's tip line is 520-351-4900, and tips can also be submitted online at tips.fbi.gov. Nancy Guthrie's family is still waiting. Over $1 million in reward money and 2 months of silence later, they are still waiting, and somewhere out there, someone knows why. Because the last person who saw her watched her walk safely into her home, and somehow, that still wasn't enough. If you have thoughts on cases like this one, on kidnappings that go unsolved, on the role of technology in modern investigations, or on what it means for a family to wait with no answers and no body and no certainty about anything at all, leave them in the comments below, because this community might have something worth reading down there. Cases like Nancy's raise real questions about elder safety, about how surveillance technology both helps and fails us, and about what justice even looks like when the person you are looking for has not been found yet. Those are conversations worth having. Again, if this is your first time here, this channel covers disappearances, unsolved cases, and the stories that tend to get forgotten long before they should be. And if that is the kind of content you want more of, subscribing and leaving a like genuinely helps this channel reach people who are looking for exactly this. It costs nothing, and it means more than you might think. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.